Do you have an idea and need a draft of a business plan? Are you seeking guidance on planning a new business? By the end of this webinar today, you will learn about the business plan fundamentals and the importance of planning process for businesses. Today, we're joined by Jared Olson. Jared's originally from Saskatoon and joins us from the Sask Startup Institute, where he joined them in the spring of 2023. Jared graduated from the University of Saskatchewan as a student athlete and captain of the Huskies Track and Field Team while working in the banking sector through his studies. In 2016, Jared graduated from the Edwards School of Business at the University of Saskatchewan, where he holds a Bachelor's of Commerce majoring in management with finance and accounting focus. Jared has worked in the hospitality industry in multiple managerial roles, including operating and opening a local cafe before leaving the industry in 2023. As an entrepreneurship advisor, Jared loves to help individuals bring their ideas to fruition and assist with adapting to the ever-changing landscape as we now know as business ownership. Welcome, Jared.
Welcome everyone today. Like mentioned, I'm here. My name is Jared Olson here with Sask Startup Institute to bring you guys business plan basics. So an intro to drafting your business plan for a business or idea that you might have. We're going to be talking about an hour to an hour and a half today, learning about how to draft a business plan. And while I do recommend that people take notes, there will be this information out there, obviously, on the YouTube channel from Tourism Sask, but I will be sending some supplementary information after this presentation. If you do have any questions, I will mention, throw it into the chat there, and I will review your questions when it is most convenient. You can also use the Q&A feature as well, which will tell you, which I will see as well. So either the chat or the Q&A, and I will be able to answer your question throughout the slides here. Before I kind of roll into business planning, I just wanted to talk about Sask Startup Institute a little bit. I'm coming here from SREDA's Entrepreneurship program. So SREDA is the Saskatoon Regional Economic Development Authority for the Saskatoon area here. We are federally funded through PrairieScan and a member of the Western Canada Business Services Network. So we are an organization that helps business owners get started, whether they're opening, growing, or scaling their business. And we're a member of that Western Canada Services Network, which means there is an organization just like ours in every province across the prairies here. So why are business plans important? If anyone has something they'd like to add here, I'd love to hear it. But if you're feeling a little shy, the main real reason that we love to talk about business planning is because the majority of people are either looking for funding, financing, investors, any of those types of things. And to even get your foot into the door, you need a business plan. So that's the main reason we're talking about it here today. So in terms of the different sections that you're going to have to worry about, there are about 8 different sections here, and we're going to touch on each and every one of them. Some of them are going to be a little more detailed than others. For instance, the financial section is going to be a very heavier piece of the business plan, but each and every section is important. I will mention that during your journey of writing your business plan, you don't have to do this from start to finish, from that executive summary all the way down to the succession plan. If you are in a certain kind of mood and are like, you know what, I want to talk about marketing and sales strategies today, and then tomorrow you feel like talking about operations, that's totally fine. You can write these in any order that you like, with some exceptions, but as long as you put it all into one completed plan, you should be good to go. The main ones that you're likely going to have to keep in certain sections, though, is that executive summary, because really that's going to be coming at the start. And then that exit succession plan is likely going to be at the end, just because you want to have that initial intro to your business and then how you're going to exit that business. So while we're looking at our business planning here, I like to provide an example of someone that we're going to be following along their journey as well. So we're going to meet Susan here. She's a community-focused entrepreneur and is in the early stages of opening a hair and nail salon. So we're going to follow her, and she's going to follow us along her business plan journey. First up, we've got the executive summary. So this is the first section of your business plan, but this is actually one that's written last. As much as it comes first in your business plan, this is the last thing you're going to write, because you're going to be giving your key components of your plan while also introducing the problem that your business solves. So you're going to look at all the different types of sections within your business plan, whether that be operations, financial, HR, etc. And then you're going to summarize all those into one summarized section so that someone coming to read your business plan can read that executive summary and get an idea of how your business operates in each of the different sections within your business plan without having to read the full 20, 30, 50-page business plan. So how we like to compare this to a real-world situation is almost like thinking of it as a movie trailer. That movie trailer is going to show you all the main parts of your business plan so you understand what kind of movie you're heading into and what things you're about to expect to watch. In terms of length, usually we like to say 2 pages is usually sufficient enough. You can go a little bit more in depth, but you don't want to go too long. I also would recommend not going too short either, because honestly, investors and financiers are going to want to see that you put some time into this business plan. And if your summary is only half a page, there might not be a lot of substance to your business and might lose you some financing down the road. Moving into business intro and description. So this is where you're going to introduce yourself and your company. You should give things like your company name, the stage of business you're in, or where you came up with the idea of your business. You're also just going to want to include your legal structure and ownership information if you've already decided upon that. Obviously, if something changes and you decide to go in a different route, that's not a huge deal, but having an idea of why you're choosing those structures and that name at first is going to be important, at least so you know you've done some due diligence. When it comes to the description of your business, be sure to provide main features and benefits of the product or service that you're offering. Include any industry trends that might be happening, challenges that might be present. You'll also want to state your competitive advantage, which I'm going to go into a little bit more details later. So if I was going to use myself for an example, like mentioned, I ran a restaurant for several years, which I ran and owned myself with some partners. But what I did touch on in my business plan was how I came up with the idea in the first place. So when I was out traveling abroad, I found some different types of restaurants and styles that I wanted to be like. So having a certain type of food, a food staple that we had was something that I wanted to bring over that Saskatoon didn't really have. And having a different type of service style and a more creative type of restaurant that was more defined than just the standard sit down and get a waiter to your table and taking your order. Having some more creativity and explaining the story of these restaurants that we were visiting abroad was a great way to link that personal experience we had to the business plan itself. Moving on to our mission statement. So this is basically just explaining why you exist. It can address any of those different bullet points that you notice on the slide. It can be a simple sentence. It can be a long explanation. If we take a look at what Susan's mission statement is, hers really just boils down to a single sentence, just because she's just a hair and nail salon. She's not doing anything too out of the box. So really, she's just looking to empower women and give back to the community. If you look at the organization I'm currently at right now, so SRETA, we're going to look at one of their old mission statements as well, which previously used to be, SRETA's role is to strengthen and grow the local economy by providing programs and services in the areas of business attraction, expansion, entrepreneurship, regional economic development, Indigenous economic development, economic intelligence, and marketing the Saskatoon region and talent attraction. If you're unsure about even what a mission statement is from this brief slide, take a look at your competitors. because generally, if you're in the restaurant industry, let's say, most of the time restaurants are going to be pretty similar into who they're targeting, what they're trying to accomplish. So you can always look at that, be similar, or take that skeleton of how they describe their mission and apply that to your business, even if it's just in a way to inspire what you're planning to plan here. Moving on to vision statements. This basically just explains the position the business ultimately wants to be in. Tends to be more inspirational and aspirational. So like a good example would be to create a world without autism. And if we look at Susan's vision statement there, which it directly aligns with her business, is she wants to create a world where every woman feels worthy and beautiful. You'll want to include your objectives here, which is just basically how you're going to be planning to measure success. And to measure that success, we usually like to use the SMART method or SMART goals, which some of you may have heard of before, which it's just an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. So for instance, the current team that I'm on, our entrepreneurship team, we have a SMART goal to assist X number of entrepreneurs in starting their business in Saskatchewan. Currently, we're looking at helping out 80 entrepreneurs, but that number changes, which is why I mentioned the X. So it's specific because we're focusing on entrepreneurs, measurable because we have that set number of 80. It's achievable and realistic because we've achieved this stat before, both in a number scale or different number scales in the past based on our staffing. And timely because we need to do it by the end of the year. So when you're thinking about objectives, think about when your business and where you're going to be in a year or 3 or 5, just so you have something that's both short-term and long-term in terms of your goals. But when it comes to the number of goals that you should be providing, I usually like to mention to have 2 to 4 is usually sufficient, but honestly, the more the better. As long as you're not providing 50 different SMART goals, because that's just a little bit too much, but having a fair amount of goals for your business in multiple years spans is going to be super useful. Okay, market analysis is next. This presentation is based from Sask Startup, but it's being put on by Tourism Saskatchewan. So you're going to have to go to Tourism Saskatchewan's YouTube channel to see this video again. But we also put this presentation on monthly. So if you want to see it live from myself or another one of my advisors, you can absolutely come and watch it. We do it usually around the end of the month. So our next one would probably be the 3rd or 4th week of January. We just haven't scheduled it yet just due to it being close to Christmas, and we want to wait till the new year before we start advertising it. Moving on to market analysis. Sorry, my slide's just taking a second to change here. There we go. So market analysis is super important because it really sets your foundation of the strategy of your business and making sure that you're putting your money in the right places. So it assesses the market in terms of your qualitative and quantitative factors. So this could be your competitive advantage. And honestly, this section is so large within your business plan that I've actually broken it down into a couple subsections: target market and customer profiles being the first, and then the internal and external analysis being the second. So the first subsection is your target market. The target market are the people that you're selling to. So they're broken down to behaviors, habits, needs. A lot of the times, which you've maybe even said this yourself, is that entrepreneurs will say that their target market is everyone. But honestly, it's impossible to target everyone. Like ultimately, that's the goal, that you want to target as many pieces of people as possible. But you're going to have to be specific as to who you're trying to target and where those advertising and marketing dollars are going to be going towards. So an example could include WestJet as what their target market is. So some of them could be adults over the age of 25, earning 50K or more, adults in that same age range, traveling twice a year for leisure, Families could be another one, etc. So speaking of those target markets, if we break that down even more into market segments, this is when we're taking a target market and then breaking it down even further. So if we look at those initial ones that I mentioned, we could say professionals aged 30 to 50 who travel quarterly for business trips could still fall under that target market. Or families who travel for a family vacation every year. Single adults between 25 and 30 who are looking for adventure, and there's so many more from that. So it's just really useful for you as a business to look at who you're trying to target and break that down as much as possible so that you know how to target them more effectively based on what type of advertising you do or any other type of promotional activity. So if we look at Susan at the bottom there, her target market is currently in Saskatoon, aged 18 to 35. So this is very broad, but it works for her. When you're dealing with your marketing teams or your content teams, it's going to be very useful to know this target market and allows you to break it down even further into segments so that you can have personalized campaigns so that when you see that ad on social media or on TV, you're like, hey, that's specifically for me. It's not just for all women in Saskatoon, it's for these women of this age. Or maybe it's even broken down to the women of that age in the Broadway area or the Brighton area, etc. So looking more into the target market here, you're going to want to analyze that market into certain terms. The first being measurable, so identifying the size of the target market, the competitive advantages, the competition, industry, economic environment. Distinguishable, so in other words, an observable difference that you can clearly define between different types of groups. So obviously age groups are a huge one here and usually are the initial target that you're looking at. Substantial, so you got to make sure that there's enough people that are interested in this business. So some businesses might say, well, our target market is actually like 14 to 20-year-old girls. And where that's specific and distinguishable and measurable, it's not substantial because you lose a very large portion there of some of those kids that might not have bank accounts, that might not have vehicles or don't have vehicles if they're 14 or 15, et cetera, et cetera. So you really have to be specific, but have a substantial number so that you're not automatically counting out some of that target market, which of course, some of those people are still going to fit within that target market or still purchase from you, but they might not be the one that you are targeting for your marketing and advertising for that specific situation. The last being accessible. So you have to, that goes to just what I said, who are you going to be able to target effectively and are they going to even be able to see this? So for instance, a good example would be anyone or any business that creates products for babies and children. So as much as they're targeting their product at babies and children, their target market is actually probably the moms or the parents, because that's who's going to end up buying their product, but might not be the one using it. So it's super important to do your research when it comes to these 4 different types of market segments. So you can do both primary and secondary research. If you're not sure the difference, primary market research is when you are actually doing the research yourself. So you're out in the world doing surveys, talking to people, jotting things down so that you're actually getting answers from the people who may or may not buy your product. Secondary market research is using a third party like SAS Startup Institute, for instance, that can provide market research that can back up your purchasing power, your target markets, that sort of thing, so that you don't have to do that yourself. If you're more interested in learning about some of this market research that we have available for entrepreneurs, you can always reach out to us or ask a question later on in this presentation, and I'll be happy to talk a little bit more about market research. Or you can always book an appointment with one of us as long as you live in Saskatchewan, and we'll be happy to talk more about it. Once you determine that target market, you can now create some customer profiles. So customer profiles are basically just buyer personas, and they individualize and humanize who your target market is without being very vague in a range, and it isn't actually a person. So you can really humanify this by looking at a couple different types of elements for that customer profile, including demographics. So this could be things like age and income, psychographics, which could be like pain points or beliefs, communication. So what language should you use? Who are you talking to? Are you trying to target scientists? Or are you trying to target grade 11 and 12s? Like there's a lot of a breakdown that you want to look to make sure that you're communicating effectively. And then lastly, the media or the channel of how you are communicating with these audiences, whether that's through TV, social media, maybe you are dealing with a very older age group and you're having to do a lot more print media or bus media or flyers, etc. So now I'm going to look at a specific example of a customer profile for Susan here. So her name is Amy. She's 28, lives in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, busy professional who values her aesthetic appearance, enjoys following health and beauty trends, and prefers to support local business. So this is a great example. You don't always have to use a picture, but it does help just to be able to, especially if your investors or financiers are looking more deeper into your business plan, they're going to want to see that you've done even that little bit of aesthetic work to make it look pretty and have some actual pictures of people next to it, even if they might just be stock images, so that you know, okay, this person is actually putting the time into this plan to make it look effortless. When it comes to the amount of profiles, usually I like to recommend 2 to 3, just because it's good to have a variety and not just have 3 of the same profiles or just one profile and that's whoever you're targeting. If you need some help creating this profile, I would recommend reaching out to us. We get access to a lot of census data, so this can really help you decide who your ideal target would be, especially if walking and neighborhood traffic is going to be a huge part of your business strategy. Now we've reached the second section of the market analysis. I have mentioned that it is a little long, obviously, but we're looking at the internal and external analysis of the business, and it's going to focus on things that are in your control or internal, and then external will be things that you can't control or that are outside of the business. So if any of you have taken like a business course or anything in this sort of area, you may have heard of a SWOT analysis. This is a great tool to use for determining your internal and external factors of your business strategy. SWOT basically is just another breakdown of 4 different types of elements there, which includes strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So for strengths, you're going to look at your company internally and evaluate what strengths you have. So examples of this could be the team that you have. Maybe you have a team that is very sales oriented or another area of the business and they just do really well at that part. Or maybe you have a certain technology or asset or machinery that stands you out across your competitors. For weaknesses, you're going to look inward again and see what weaknesses your businesses have, which again, this could be your team. Maybe you have such a strong sales team that your customer experience is trash and your team is actually both a strength and a detriment. It can be 2. Now looking externally, we're going to look at opportunities first, which you're going to look outwards to your environment and evaluate possible opportunities that might exist. Could be a trend that's upcoming or a change in regulation. A couple examples I like to use here include, I'm sure everyone remembers the big trend of fidget spinners and how annoying they are, but this was a huge trend and you saw a lot of people coming to market it and making a lot of money on this type of trend. Another good example would be when cannabis was legalized in Canada. So you have an industry that never existed before, And then a change in regulation or laws created this new industry. And so there was a lot more of an opportunity for existing businesses that could be potentially in the egg industry or some other manufacturing industry and really hit that ground running and take up some of that market share that is currently at zero. Lastly, we've got threats. So you're going to look outward to that environment again and see that any threats that might exist. So some examples here could be like technology changes or changes in consumer behavior, which again, fidget spinners is a great example of this threat as well, because as much as they were super cool and awesome, there's a certain point where fads dissipate. And all of a sudden, people did not like that stuff anymore. And how often do you see them nowadays? Pretty much never. And those were super popular, what, 2, 3 years ago? So definitely something to consider there. So here's a SWOT matrix as an example. Oops, I skipped there. So just a reminder that strengths and weaknesses are internal, whereas those opportunities and threats are external to the business. So if you do want more information on this, you can absolutely request this, and I can send you this copy of the slide of this. But just so you know, you will be getting these slides again. So let's look at McDonald's as an example before we look at Susan's here. So if we look at McDonald's from the internal side first, those strengths being their brand, everyone who knows who they are, they know what McDonald's is. As well, their dedicated food R&D team. They're always creating new products. Look what's going on with Cosmix, their new offset of their food and beverages in the US, and I think maybe even one in Canada. So that's something to consider there, that their R&D is huge. Now, the weaknesses, branding could also almost be on here as well, because everyone knows McDonald's, but they also know that they're junk food. So some people might lose a target market there right away. Another weakness could be cultural and international growth, just because even though every McDonald's you go to around the world has different types of food trying to look at what country they're in, they still aren't as traditional as they could be in the types of food you might be looking for. Like, for instance, Canada's a great example of poutine is super huge here, obviously. And honestly, personally speaking, I don't know about other people, McDonald's is probably the last place I'm gonna go for a poutine. If anything, I'd rather just go to like a rink or even like smoked poutineery or something, that is going to be more traditional or more, you know what you're gonna get. Now, looking externally for McDonald's for opportunities, they can potentially offer healthier options, just because they are known for that junk food side of things. And they also can innovate their menu time and time again. Again, Cosmix, huge, that's a huge opportunity that McDonald's has to gain into that space. The threats being obesity, so it's obviously on the rise, and it could be a reason why either additional regulation come in against McDonald's in states, cities, countries, etc., but as well strong competition. Fast food, there's a lot of options out there, and even me personally, if we had a Chick-fil-A here, I'd probably choose them 9 times out of 10 over McDonald's, just based on either something new, something different, something that more aligns with my taste. So Susan used her own SWOT, if you notice at the bottom there, to uncover opportunities in our market, such as unfulfilled customer needs for her top-tier service and natural beauty goods. So by keeping her offering small batch and high quality, she's able to meet the need for this service. So another way to an analysis, this market analysis type of things is a PESTLE tool. So again, another acronym. So we're going to go through each of them. So P for PESTLE stands for political. So an example of this might be, let's say you're an organization that only does business with the government, and then all of a sudden there's a snap election called. You're all of a sudden going to have no sales, because once an election is going to be happening, there's no purchasing from the government. So your procurement sales are going to just decline very fast. E for economic. So an example here could be, maybe it's a low employment rate. So people have less money to spend on food and recreational activities if you're in that tourism or hospitality industry. S for social. So this could be the trend that people are looking more and more to buy local. So this could mean anything for a lot of you as well. So for some people, local means their city or neighborhood. For some, it might mean their province. For some, it could even be larger and be the country. And I've seen some trends as well that people are even more open to buy North American over anything international. That's how they determine local. So don't always just hold that local spritz as, oh, it's from my city or from my province. It could be even larger because people would rather support people nearby over people overseas. T for technological. So this could be something like when Skip the Dishes and Uber first started coming out. So that really changed the game of how restaurants delivered products to their customers. But that being said, we could look at what's happening now in that kind of space. There's many apps, and the purchasing of people ordering Skip and Uber is on the slow decline just because of the amount of options out there, customer dissatisfaction, etc. So, and price, obviously. So that is also something that's still running around. The next E, which we already had one E, but this one is environmental. So this could be something like grass-fed cows, or you look at what A&W does with their marketing strategy towards their beef. And last is L for legal. So I mentioned this example already once, the cannabis industry. So this is something that is very legally based and went from being an illegal industry, black market industry, to be a open market industry. So that's something that you have to think about as well. On top of the pestle tool, there's also competitive analysis. So that's looking at both direct and indirect competition. So if we look at this example on the screen here, between different type of beverage manufacturers. So direct competition would be something like Coke and Pepsi, because they offer a similar product and also have supplementary products that all compete against each other, whether that's Sprite and 7-Up, or the different root beers, or the different iced teas, etc. However, an indirect competitor would be someone like Booster Juice. So as much as they're not competing on the same level playing field, they're after different types of target segments that are within the same target market, but they still complete the same end user goal of quenching your thirst. So you might not be out thinking, I might get a Coke or a Booster Juice, but both of those things could solve the problem that you might have. Marketing and sales strategies. I know that market analysis was pretty long. So again, if anyone has any questions that they want to throw into the chat or the Q&A, please feel free to do so. But I will move on to marketing and sales strategies here, and probably touch base on any questions on the next section. So now that you've analyzed that market, it's time to apply that research that you've just done into your marketing strategy. So again, all of this info will stem from the marketing analysis that you did. But at the end of the day, marketing strategy describes the activity you will use to promote your offering. The common method of doing this is to explain your marketing strategy through the 4 Ps or the marketing mix. And as you can see on the screen, the 4 Ps stand for product, price, place, and promotion, which we're going to go into a little bit deeper dive for each of these. So the first P is product or service. This section, you should provide details of your product and service and how it meets the needs of your target market that we just described. So you can describe your product in terms of look and feel, while your service, you can talk about the customer service experience, etc. So when you're writing this section, you might also want to consider things like, is it going to be mass produced? Is it going to be customizable? Are you making this by hand? Is it being used by local products? What life cycle is it in? Is it a brand new type of product? Or are you taking an existing product or innovation and changing it a bit? Have you tested this in the market? Is this something that that you've like actually taken to consumers and seeing if they enjoy it or what they might find flaws in. Next up, we've got price, which this is really just super simple in terms of what are you going to charge for your product, which I will say coming up with your price can be one of the most difficult things you do in creating your business, but describing what a price is, that's a lot easier for me. Different price strategies that you can consider when determining what your price might be include versioning. So this is basically just means when you're offering the same product for multiple different types of versioning. So cars are a great example of this. You're going to have your base model, you're going to have your sports model, you're going to have touring model. Is it a hatchback, manual versus automatic, sunroof, moonroof, automatic, everything? You know, you're going to have a lot of different things for that same product with different price points at each one. Differentiation. So this is when you offer a variety of prices for the same product or service. So movie theaters are a great example of this, even though maybe we don't go to movies as much as we used to, remember that. But you're going to have different prices for different times of the day, whether it's a matinee or a morning show, you know, or like Toonie Tuesdays, or it's going to be cheaper to go out on a Tuesday than it's going to be for a Friday, Saturday night. Bundling is another good one as well. This is when you offer multiple products or services for one price. A lot of us are very used to this, especially when you look at telecommunication companies like SaskTel and Rogers, where you're going to get your home phone, your TV, your Wi-Fi, etc. It's all going to be on one plan, and you're going to be charged for one thing. Or maybe you have a family plan and you have 5 different cell phones under one plan. Loss leaders is another one here. So this is when a product or service actually loses money on its own, but requires customers to purchase additional products to experience the loss leader. So printers are a great example of this, or like Nespresso or Keurig machines, where the printer or coffee machine itself is pretty price effective and it's not that bad of a price at all. But then when you go to refill it, when you need more coffee pods, when you need more ink, you're like, wow, that is very expensive. So definitely something to think about there. Grocery stores are another great example as well, because if you look at the flyer, you might say, wow, that price of milk or chicken is, you can't beat it. I've got to go buy that right now. But how they get you is you get into the door, you buy those products, and then you realize, ooh, I actually could use something from health and beauty, and I actually need a carton of eggs, etc. And then they're making that markup from what they lost on that flyer sale. So a couple tips, think back to the goals that you set. This will help you determine what your price is going to be. It's also useful to look at your competitors and see what they're charging. I'm going to talk a little bit about price in the financial section as well, but definitely stay tuned for that. The third one is going to be place and distribution. Either or works. And this basically is super simple. Where are you making your product? Where can customers get your product? Are you online? Are you in a store? Is it delivered to your house? Is it a digital service? Is it on your phone? Etc. So it's really just where can you get the product? Where is it made? Done. Like very simple section. Lastly is promotions. This one's going to be huge as well. So this is basically just describing how people are going to find out about your product or service and how you're going to communicate with your target market. So there's a wide variety of tactics that you can use to promote your product to prospective clients, including the ones listed on the slides there. But I will mention, it's not necessarily to be in every single one of these promo channels, but you want to be in a bunch of them. One that I mentioned that honestly every single business should be in regardless is digital marketing. We only see this growing and getting better. So having a website, having social media, getting someone to work on your SEO, which if you don't know what SEO is, search engine optimization, which all of your online things tend to go hand in hand into moving your ranking up on Google. So being online is huge, but being on a number of these other types of channels is also useful. So when you are thinking about promotion, I do like to mention, don't forget to go back to your customer profiles to see what is the best way to target each one of these different types of customer profiles that you have. So let's say you're looking at more of a younger audience. Obviously, digital marketing is going to be big here. Print marketing might not be useful at all. A lot of people don't like to take paper home. A lot of people aren't looking at billboards. Maybe a lot of people are taking public transit, and that's where you need to be targeting. Maybe these people own an older vehicle and you need to be on the radio because nobody uses the USB, or there's lots of things that you need to consider based on that target market that you might have in mind. If you are having issues with determining your target markets or how to target them with your promotion, absolutely reach out to SAS Startup. All of our advisors are very well versed in targeting consumers, especially some of us that have owned businesses previously, as we've been through the ringer before. HR strategy. So again, if anyone has any questions, please throw it into the chat. We are coming closer to that financial section, which is the longest. So I prefer to have a lot of these initial questions taken care of because there are usually more that arise during financials. But anyway, we will move on. So Section 5, HR. So this is basically just convincing potential investors, loan officers, and stakeholders that you have a great team. So something I do like to mention is a lot of investing professionals say that they would much rather invest in individuals that have a mediocre or even a bad idea, but their team is very in it and they're very strong and they have a good professional background any day over a group that has an amazing idea, but they all have no experience in the industry they're trying to do. They aren't very, let's say, passionate. That's a good word for it. So you definitely want to be a passionate business owner, do the work, and investors and stakeholders will see that. So HR, this section is honestly pretty short. You don't have to put too much into it, but it's really it's a good way to just pump up your ego and the egos of your management team as best as possible. So talking about your accomplishments over your professional or your personal careers, skills, strengths, who your external team might include. So advisors, mentors, and consultants, management style, management history, any goals that you've completed, etc. A lot of people in this section will just look at their resumes of them and their management team, summarize the important things. So any certifications they have, major experience, projects completed, and then they'll just attach their resumes to the appendix of the business plan, which for those who don't know what an appendix is, that's just the back end of your business plan that isn't necessarily you need to read it, but it's basically just you citing your work in an essay. So having those articles, those reports, those resumes that back up what you've said in all of your other sections. Normally, I would take a break at here just because we do have a lot to touch on, but just in the interest of time, as I know you all have, some of you might be on your lunch break or in the middle of your workday and are listening in, I'm just going to skip that break and we will keep on trucking along. But I do encourage you that if you have any questions, like I mentioned, to please just throw it into the chat or the Q&A and I'll be happy to run through it here. So operations strategy is the next up here. So this is just telling you and your readers how you're going to run your business and deliver that value to your customers. So really be sure that you link the design of your operations to your marketing plan. So a good example is if you plan on having high quality as being one of your competitive advantages, then make sure that your operations provide high quality and not low costs. Because as a lot of us know, high quality and low costs are not the same thing. If you spend less money, you might not have a product that lasts as long. So a good example would be, let's say you are looking for athleisure wear, so something that is more sports based. So if you're looking at high quality, Lululemon is a great example of this. But something that's low cost might be the Walmart brand of that, or the George brand of that, which it may not last as long, but the cost is lower, and it does a similar thing. So something to think about in terms of that trade-off. So in terms of your operations strategy, be sure to include a couple of things like a general description of your day-to-day operations, of what a day in the life looks like for you as an owner or a general manager, or what your staff days look like, what the facility requirements you're going to need. So depending on your industry, there might be certain requirements the building that you want is going to require. So a good example would be a restaurant here. And if they're doing any deep frying or major cooking, they're going to need a hood vent system. So they're either going to need to make sure that they have a building that already has one installed, or they're going to have the funds to install that. Some other examples could be if you are a SHA-based type of company, so anything through the health authority, you have to have a certain standard of cleanliness, or there is a certain washroom requirement or bathroom requirements for certain types of businesses, etc. So it's definitely useful to take a look at the industry you're in and see if there's any additional requirements your business is going to need to be operational. And if you don't know, that's where we come in. Give us a shout, and depending on where you live, we can provide you with accurate answers to what you might need to do on top of what you're already doing for the business that you are putting together. Some other types of things to think about include tracking and IT systems. So things like inventory systems, clocking in and out systems, scheduling systems. Do you need all your employees to be online or have a computer? So having accurate Wi-Fi, guest Wi-Fi, etc. So having all of that laid out into what your operations look like is going to be huge. A lease agreement is going to be good here as well. Just touching on any major points that your lease or your mortgage might say about the building you're going in. You don't necessarily need to put that smack dab into your operations report, but having some tidbits taken from the lease agreement and then slapping that full lease agreement into your appendix, so that if a stakeholder has questions about it, they can flip back to it and get the answer that they need. Another thing is, if any of you are in more manufacturing types of industries, you're going to need an operations manual, or SOPs, standard operating procedures for short, just because there are certain things that you're going to have to do, and they're going to have to be mandated ahead of time. So having those processes figured out before you open the business are going to be huge, and a lot of stakeholders are going to want to know that you've thought about this, especially if you're in a more not dangerous industry, but an industry that is more regulated, like cannabis, liquor, tobacco, those types of ones. All right. We're going to move on to financials, but I do notice we have a couple questions. So, do you offer advisory sessions where we go over a business plan together, specific to the company we're starting, or helping proofread? So, at SAS Startup, we do review parts of business plans. We do have a requirement that you have to take this presentation to be able for us to review it. Just because we are a smaller team, we only have the capacity to review one section of your business plan. So I do recommend that if you fall under certain demographics, that there are other organizations that help review the full thing with you if you need financing. So some examples include WESC, or Women's Entrepreneurs in Saskatchewan. They go through that full thing as well. Futurepreneurs, another good one. So young entrepreneurs in Canada, they have some business planning resources as well. There's other organizations as well that help, but we only look at one section, and that's pretty much it. We also do have business plan experts that you can talk to from our organization that for $25, you can meet with these consultants and they can help go over your business plan with you for a fee for that $25, as I mentioned, and then whatever they charge after that initial meeting. But I would recommend booking in with us if you haven't already, and we can talk about that process and get you kind of going there. Okay, so you can actually reach out to us directly. My email will be available at the end of this presentation, but you can also go to our website, skstartup.ca, and shoot either our general email or one of us directly, and we can actually provide you with completed sample business plans. Depending on the industry you're in, we might not have something super specific to you, but if you're in much more of those standard organizations like restaurants, retail, e-commerce, doctor's offices, those types of things, like very standard types of businesses, we have samples of completed ones that we can give you that can help give you some insight to kind of help fill in those blanks. But at the end of the day, financiers and stakeholders are going to want to see that you plan to be profitable and how you're going to be profitable and when you're going to be profitable. So making sure that you have that profit and being realistic, because if you say, oh, we're going to make $50,000 in our first year of profits, they're going to be like, I don't know. But being realistic is going to be huge. If you do hit that, great, but you still just want to be realistic. Hopefully that answers that. Thank you for the question. And now that I've got those questions, again, if anyone has any, please throw it into the chat and I will talk about it as we go. But we're hitting the bulk section here of financials. So, and honestly, I find to be the most useful and the most important part of the plan. Not that every other part isn't important, but you get the gist. Okay. So up until this point, we've outlined your concepts. We've demonstrated a need in the market. You've shown how you're going to execute your ideas. You've proven that your team is amazing and ready to open this business. Now we need to take those ideas and turn them into financial projections. Because at the end of the day, as much as businesses are passion projects, you are in this business to make money and help sustain yourself. So we're going to be looking at 4 main categories here of the financial sections, but these aren't limited to doing more. If you want to do more analysis, please go ahead. The first 4 being startup costs, sales and cost projections, break-even analyses, and projected financial statements. So for financial forecasts, I like to tell people that they need to have 3 assumptions or 3 different types of projections. One being that worst case scenario. So that worst case scenario here, that average case scenario, so what you're expecting. So usually it's a good start to start with the average and then work the worst and then the best from that average. Because this is what you're expecting to do. This is if COVID hits again, and this is if every customer you expect and their parents and their dog all come and buy from you. So Susan used a bar chart here to outline her financial projections for the next 2 years. But it's just, you go on to make sure that you have all those different types of scenarios. Generally, I like to say having 2 years of projections is super useful. When I did my business plan, I did 5, but I also had a lot more time before we were opening. So doing as much work as possible so that your financiers or investors know when they're going to get paid back. And just, I guess, another example here would be that if you have these bar graphs, having them are super useful and just to kind of have into your regular business plan, and then having the work and the more detailed projection might be something that you put later on in the appendix. So next with startup costs, you're going to need to figure out how much investment you need to start your business. So how much capital do you need to get going? Where's your money going to be coming from to pay for these costs? Do you have money saved up? Do you need a bank loan? Do you need investors? Are your parents helping you? So having this written down as to where you're going to be getting your money from to pay for these expenses is going to be huge, especially if you're like, hey, bank that I need money from, I need $20,000 from you. But when you do your startup costs, you realize, oh, I actually need more. So it's just good to have all of those outlined ahead of time and have them ready so that you're not caught with your pants down, sorry. Something that I mentioned to everyone from my business experience is when I got out a loan for my business, I always say, ask for a little more, because I looked at all of our startup expenses and I'm like, okay, this is the exact amount we need, but it would have been nice to have 5 or 10% more to help with some potential working capital, maybe pay ourselves a little bit more or pay ourselves back from some expenses that we upfronted the cost, etc. Because it's easier to have that money under the business than potentially having to use your own personal funds if you don't have to. Here's some example for a startup cost budget estimate from a new coffee roaster company. This is not me. As much as I did roast coffee, this is not my business. So if we look here, noticing that our total startup expenses here are 11,000, and our assets are 194. So the total amount that we need, 205,000. That funding equals the same. That's exactly the amount of money that we're looking for there. So you want to make sure that those numbers are equal. And if either of them is bigger, so if we look at it and say, oh, our funding actually ends up being higher. Let's say we have an investor that gives us some more money and we still want to take out the same amount of information there. Then we might say, oh, well, let's buy an extra piece of equipment or bulk up some of this here. Usually it's easier just to throw it in working capital, but you want these two amounts equal so that you're balanced. Now that you have your startup costs, you're going to have to analyze your sales revenues and your operating expenses to decide whether it's going to be worthwhile to invest the capital needed to get going. So some sales projections is the gross amount of money you expect from the sales of your product or service. Again, I want to make sure that you know that these are projections. These are all pretty much guesses. Like there's no way for you to know how much money you're going to make, but you just need to be realistic to figure out how much money do you need to be at least somewhat set up for the next year, or what's the realistic amount of customers we can get in a year and how much are they willing to pay. So setting that price and applying it to the customers, or vice versa, sending a number of customers and seeing what price works out, is going to be best for you just to play around to see what you need to achieve to be successful. So on the other hand, you're going to have to think about your costs. So you should provide at least 12 months of costs just so you're safe. In terms of operating and other costs, these are going to be the direct cost of providing your good or service. A lot of people consider this to be called COGS, or cost of goods sold, but you're also going to have to think about your overhead, or the things that are consistently there that do not factor in your cost of goods sold. So that would be like, some overhead examples would be like rent or utilities for the most part, some general supplies, software, just things that you're paying that don't necessarily need for for you to make a sale, but you need for your business to be operational. Once you have both those sales and operating costs, then you can figure out what your annual outlook's going to look like, of what your business is going to look like. Some of you might be thinking, how am I going to come up with these numbers? So when I did my business plan, I did it the hard way. I got quotes for everything that I needed, whether that was insurance, utilities, rent, etc. I did all these by hand, looked everything up one by one, which is useful and great, but it spends a lot of time. Your alternative there is you can actually use us here at SAS Startup Institute, and we can provide you with a competitor report that not only tells you who your competitors are going to be, but it's also going to tell us what the annual sales are for that company. I will mention that sales are going to be based on a single year of time. So if this company has been open for 20 years, that sales figure could be from year 2, could be from year 18. You have no idea. So that's take something with a grain of salt and look at that number and maybe adjust more or less based on how realistic it is for you. But it also looks at the costs, which is super useful to know, hey, what's this competitor spending on overhead in a year? Oh, this is going to be useful for me because I can just take those numbers, divide them by 12, done. However, I will mention that the expenses for our competitor reports are in ranges. So it's not going to say they spent $6,011 last year in advertising. It's going to say, oh, well, they spent somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000, which it's a range, not super useful, but it's better than nothing so that you know, hey, my average case scenario might be $7,500. My worst case scenario might be 5, and my best might be 10, or vice versa. So it's very useful into determining those baseline figures for your business plan and planning out those expenses of what you might be expecting. So I've got a little sales forecast here for you. Because it's a sample, I've only got 6 months there, but as I mentioned earlier, you want to make sure you have 12 months just so you have a full year's scope. I would say review it, and if you have any questions, just let me know. Some things to really look at here for Susan is looking at each of those different services that she's offering. And so she's expecting to have the same sales for salon services, but laser hair is going to be growing year over year, or sorry, month over month. And retail is going to start off with nothing and slowly grow. As well, the direct cost of sales are relatively staying the same. But as you notice, the laser hair growth is increasing as we go and is obviously based on a percentage based on what the sales are. Same goes for retail, but she's expecting the same sales. So it's pretty flat right there. All right, we've got a question. And when it comes to our market research and competitor research, yes, our research is all free. So you can reach out to SAS Startup Institute, and we do have limits on a monthly amount of reports that we can provide to you. But absolutely reach out to us, completely free. And yeah, just give us a shout, whether there's a form on our website or you can just send me an email and I'll be happy to help you out. The only obviously stipulations include you have to be located in Saskatchewan and you have to be involved in a business in Saskatchewan. You cannot be either a student or a consultant. So you actually have to be working on your own business, not someone else's, or a fake business, obviously. Thank you for the question. Break-even analysis. So this is super huge because it really just determines where your sales meet your expenses and knowing what that minimum amount of money you have to make for a certain period to be able to be profitable. So revenues equal costs. Everything after that break-even point is going to be profit. Anything less than that is going to be a loss. So depending on the type of business you're in, you're going to have to define what your unit is. So if you're a product-based business, super easy. But if you're more service-based, you're going to have to determine what that unit of measurement is, whether that's hours, treatments, courses, or maybe it's even customers. So here's a great example of a break-even point here. Our sales and our units are located on the different axes there, with our break-even point being smack dab in the middle, with anything underneath that being a loss and anything above it being that profit. So this is super huge just to have an idea of what you need to do as a business to surpass those fixed costs that you're going to have in a month, and what you need to do and how many you need to sell to get there. I will mention that even though this break-even point is super important, you might not hit that in your first year. You might not hit that in your first 5 years. Most businesses don't break even right away. Personally, we just were in the red my first year, and then we were in the green year over year over that. So there are just a lot more costs that come along with opening a business and just have a lot of learning experience to get through. So if you're in the red, that is totally to be expected. especially in your first year. You just want to make sure that you are making enough year over year after that to cover that loss. A good example that you've probably heard of before is if we look at Facebook, for instance, they didn't hit a profit till year 5. So it's super common to not make money right away, but you want to make sure that you are paying your bills on time. So having that covered is going to be huge. So fixed costs, these are going to be what are the same regardless of what happens. So some examples would be like managerial salaries, the rent or the lease of your building, insurance, utilities. Obviously, utilities is going to be one that is a variable price, but it's a fixed cost because it's something you have to do whether you're open or not. If you are open 10 months of the year, you're still paying electrical and water for those other 2 months, unless you obviously disconnect your service, but to be expected. So if we look at Susan's example down there, she pays $1,500 to rent her space, which includes utilities and insurance. So that's a great deal. And she doesn't have any employees yet, so her current fixed expenses are $18,000 a year. She's not paying herself yet, which is a little sus, but yes, you would still want to include what you're paying yourself in there as well, but sometimes business owners cannot do that right away. You're also going to have variable costs here, which are the costs that include the more you produce, include the more you spend. So this is both labor and materials of what goes into your product or service. Depending on your product and service, sometimes managerial roles or owners are on that fixed side. Sometimes they're on that variable side. It really depends on what your role is. So if you're doing more admin and doing more non-product based, then obviously you're going to be on that fixed cost side. But if you are an owner, if you're the only employee and owner, and you're the one actually putting together the products or serving the customers, well, then that's going to be a variable cost. So just got to really, it comes down to what the scope of what that employee is doing. So I've outlined a couple formulas here for you to calculate your break-even point based on units and dollars. You'll be getting a copy of this, so don't worry about writing this down, and you don't have to use these specifically to determine your break-even point, but figuring that out to some of this extent is going to make it a lot easier for you. So one of the best uses of break-even analysis is to play with different scenarios. So it's a great example to see what happens when I add another employee, or when I increase the cost of this product, or lose sales one year, or have a higher principal or interest payment. So it's just super useful to play around with these and play around with your Excel files or your financial statements to see what the different scenarios could look like based on different expenses or different sales volumes or different employees. So here we've got an example of the break-even calculation. In this example, we see that the business needs to sell 48 units or earn 1,920 in order to break even. So again, like I mentioned, play with the numbers, go back to your scenarios, the worst, average, and best, to see if you can hit your break even faster. Think about cutting fixed costs if you want to get faster. Think about increasing the selling price or somehow lowering those costs, lessening employees, etc. So next, we've got projected financial statements. There's many different statements, but we're really going to focus on the 3 primary ones that we want to see in your business plan. The first being your balance sheet. So this is a snapshot of what you own and what you owe at a particular point in time. Since you're writing your business plan in the startup stage, likely, then it's going to be a projected balance sheet or a pro forma. And a lot of your balances for things are either going to be zero or harder to calculate. But for the most part, you're going to say, what do I own, or what do I need to own? So the assets, the machinery, the building, and then what do I owe for that? So how much money are you putting in yourself as equity, and how much loan or investing are you going to need to start this business up? Here is an example here for an auto repair shop. there's three main sections: the assets, or what you own, and the liabilities, or what you owe, and the ownership equity, which is your share in capital plus retained earnings. Share capital is what basically you're putting in as shareholders and what you're buying of shares within the company. Retained earnings are basically just those amounts that are carried over from previous years. So let's say this is year 2 for a company. And if we look if it's year 2, they've got 2162 of retained earnings, which basically means they would have made $8,000 last year because they had $10,000 of owing retained earnings last year. So that's something just to consider, that you just carry forward those profits or losses onto your retained earnings within your balance sheet. And if we notice, we need these numbers to match up. So total liabilities and capital, 314. Total assets, 314. So we need those numbers to link up and be equal. There's a net worth line added on here, so just kind of ignore that, not super worthwhile, but you get the gist. The second most common financial statement, which honestly, this is my most preferred financial statement when it comes to your business plan, and just at any given point looking at where your business is and how healthy your business is. Some people call this profit and loss, some people call this an operating statement, but basically it's just a list of the business's revenues and expenses over a specific period of time. And if we look at that calculation there, revenues minus expenses equals your net income or loss. So this is a great statement to use for your average, your best, and your worst case, and even your break-even scenarios, just so you know how much money you're making, what you need to spend, and it breaks down your expenses and your sales into a lot more depth that you might not have in a smaller little financial statement. So if we look at Susan's beauty salon here, we're going to see those sales at the top here and what her gross margin is. So that's basically just looking at what your sales over your cost of goods sold is. We're going to see all those overhead expenses. So these are all the expenses that are not variable and not based on your sales. You can see payroll here, which this one can arguably, some of it could be into the cost of goods sold, depending on what the product is, but they've decided to leave labor separate. And then you've got everything else, all your other random little expenses here that you're going to have to worry about, but you still want to make sure that you're budgeting for those so that you're safe in case something does happen, especially when it comes to repair and maintenance would be the big one. Last, we've got a cash flow statement. So the previous statements looked at what the business owns, what the business makes, all that kind of jazz, but it doesn't talk about cash flow. So you might have a net income on that income statement that I mentioned, but you actually might have a negative cash flow because you're waiting on invoices to be paid, or you prepaid for some expenses for next year. So that cash flow statement is going to be huge, especially for your first couple of years, to make sure you've got adequate cash coming in and out. So you're actually knowing how often it takes you to collect your money, whether you have enough money or capital to operate, etc. So this is something I like to tell people to review monthly, just to make sure that you have enough cash coming in and are able to pay your expenses and pay your employees on time. All right, here's an example of a cash flow statement, but you want to make sure that this amount down here is not negative. If you're close to zero, especially in that first year, not a bad thing. But if that negative balance carried over into 3 years, I'd be like, yeah, we got to change that, because you need to make sure that you're at least close to making money. If this said another zero on the end was $9,000, that would be way too high of a negative cash flow. And I would recommend either more investment yourself, a higher loan, another investor, etc. Okay, financials, we're leading to the end of the presentation here. We're almost done. Thank you for bearing with me. I'm going to leave those questions to the very end. I'm just going to touch on our exit succession plan, and a little bit about SaaS Startup before heading out. But the final section is the exit or succession plan. I do know that this is kind of a weird thing to think about because you're just thinking about starting your business, and I'm making you think about how you're going to leave this business, which is a very weird thing to think about. But the thing is, you never know what's going to happen in your business lifetime. Someone could pass away, not saying that ever would. Someone might get sick for a long period of time. Someone might leave, a business partner might leave. So it's just good to have these scenarios predetermined in case something does happen, because life is ever changing. It's going to really help with protecting that legacy of the business, especially if you've been in a business for a long period of time, maintaining that service for the community that you're in, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're developing your plan, remember to use professionals so that you can provide knowledge and expertise in the areas, as you probably don't have a lot of experience here. So I always recommend talking to a lawyer, whether that's doing up a will, succession plan, anything like that at some stage of your business. If you do need a lawyer, that Ask an Expert program I've mentioned before, we have lawyers available. So absolutely reach out to us, and you can talk to a lawyer for that initial meeting for $25, and then whatever you want to talk to them after that. Some other considerations for your business plan: make sure you think about the audience that you're writing for. Remember that every business plan is unique. Include a cover page. Make sure you have your business name on there, logo, contact information. I will say that contact information is one that is left off probably the most, because let's say you give this to someone who's thinking about giving you money, and then they say, how am I going to contact this person? And they're not going to try to sort you out. If you didn't even put your name and your phone number on there, they're not going to invest in you because you didn't even think about those very minor details. So making sure that you're covered on all ends there. Another thing you might want to think about is a NDA or a confidentiality agreement at the start of your business plan. Sometimes, especially if you're in the tech industry, you don't want anyone else hearing about this idea or being able to spew this out to the world. So having someone sign an NDA as they read the business plan might be something that you might be required to do. If you're in a more traditional style business, restaurant, cleaning service, anything like that, you're not going to need an NDA. It's really only going to come down if you're dealing with more things that have patents and trademarks around it. You're also going to want to make sure that you have that appendix, which I've mentioned a couple times. This is a great place to have job descriptions, resumes, financial statements, industry reports, etc., just so you have some, oh, check this out if you want to read more about it, or see page 67 to see the work backed up from my financial statements. So if you want competitors, we can only provide you with 250 competitors per month. For industry reports and census reports, we can do 3 per month. But if you want to reach out to us every month forever and ever, you absolutely can. Is revenue the same as gross income or gross profit? Are these industry terms? So gross income, like income and profit, they're not the same. So revenue and gross income generally are the same thing. Yes. Revenues could also like sometimes include other money sources if you'd rather have that separate. But most people, those I would say revenue and gross income are generally the same thing, and you can usually use them interchangeably. Gross profit is not. Gross profit is that amount of money that comes after expenses. So you've got your gross profit, and then you've also got your net profit. So gross profit is the profit after your direct expenses. So those variable expenses, so those cost of goods sold, so supplies, inventory, labor. And then your net profit would be after everything else. So rent, software, utilities, telephone, etc. And yes, they are industry terms. They're definitely accounting terms, which is where we get a lot of this information from. How many pages do you recommend the business plan to be total? It varies for sure. But like if you look at what we had there, generally we like the executive summary to be a page or 2. And then every other section should be longer than that. So I usually like to say 20 plus pages. But if you're at 18 pages, not a big deal. but the longer the better for the most part, as long as those executive summary and financials are very clear and concise. But at the end of the day, it's based on who you're targeting from your business plan. Is this for a bank? Is this for an investor? Is this for an internal reason? So I would always recommend chat to one of us here at SAS Startup, and we'll be happy to give you a more clear, concise answer to that. But it's definitely a range. I'd say 20 to 50 is usually a good place to start. Thank you for all the questions, everyone. Okay, so next steps. Where do you go from here? So I've talked a lot about market research, obviously. So definitely reach out to us here at SAS Startup Institute as we can help you develop that analysis system. We've also got templates, samples of business plans, guides that can help walk you through these processes. You can also use us as a one-on-one business plan service. So like I mentioned, if you want a review of a business plan section, give us a shout. Since you've done this webinar, we'll be happy to look through a section for you. You can also take advantage of that Ask an Expert program to talk to a business plan professional. However, it's $25 for the first 45 minutes, and then whatever they charge after that. So business plan reviews can be pretty expensive, but I recommend talking to us, talking to some family and friends that might have some industry knowledge that can take a look at for you, get it proofread, just so it's just those ideas that are looked at first. Okay. Ending off with questions. So in this last slide here, if you can throw your last minute questions in there, even though we've just got a couple minutes here, but I'm just going to talk about our offices here before ending off. If you are located in Saskatoon, we are located on First Avenue South across from Midtown Mall. You can book with any of our advisors here, and we would love to help you. We also do walk-ins in Saskatoon, Monday and Wednesdays. We've actually adjusted those times for the winter season, and we accept walk-ins all day, Monday and Wednesday. So just roll in, ring the doorbell, and someone will be happy to help you. We also have an office in Regina. However, it's on appointment only, just because it is in a co-working space at Path, if you're familiar with that. And then you can see that we've got our appointment link, email and phone number, and Facebook if you'd like to follow us. But before that, I'm just going to check out, looks like everyone's just saying thank you. So if you have any questions, give me a shout, but that takes me to the end of the presentation. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thanks, Jared. Definitely a lot of information to kind of digest there, but definitely a lot of good information.